In the hidden corridors of history, there exist documents and testimonies so dark, so meticulously buried, that their existence challenges the very narratives we have been told about the Second World War. These are files that intelligence agencies fought to suppress, war crimes investigators tried to overlook, and governments buried beneath layers of secrecy to protect fragile alliances. From the snow-laden forests of Eastern Europe to the scorched landscapes of Manchuria, the truths contained within these archives illuminate human decisions made in shadows, where morality collided with strategy and survival. Some of these revelations were only made possible decades later through the slow leak of declassified cables, the careful transcription of intercepted communications, and the courageous defection of those who could no longer remain silent. Each page, each photograph, each marginal note preserved in these files tells a story of meticulous planning, bureaucratic precision, and the relentless machinery of war. They are accounts of operations that never appeared on public battle maps, the systematic erasure of populations, and the deliberate manipulation of truth to serve broader geopolitical ends. Reading them is not just an exercise in historical curiosity, it is a confrontation with decisions made in the shadows, choices that sent thousands to death, shaped the fates of nations, and left legacies that still reverberate today. These are not stories of heroism or victory, but of calculated cruelty, hidden experiments, and the profound moral compromises that emerged when the stakes of global domination eclipsed the value of individual human life. Chapter 1: Shadows Beneath the Katyn Forest. In the early spring of 1940, a chilling series of orders were dispatched from the highest echelons of the Soviet government, carrying the weight of a decision that would echo across generations. The files, later codified under NKVD Operation Spring 042, documented the execution of over 20,000 Polish officers, police, and intelligentsia. These men had been detained following the Soviet invasion of Poland in September 1939, captured during a campaign that had seen entire divisions of the Polish army disarmed, disbanded, and interned in camps across Belarus and Western Russia. The victims were systematically transported to remote sites near Katyn, Kharkiv, and Kalinin, often under the pretense of relocation or reassignment. The trains carried not only prisoners, but also a heavy atmosphere of inevitability, as if the metal wheels themselves could sense the grim fate awaiting those within. The Katyn forest, a dense expanse of birch and pine near Smolensk, became a silent witness to this atrocity. Gestapo Fileno, 17, captured in 1943, revealed meticulous documentation by the German forces after they discovered the graves, noting the uniformity of the executions. Each bullet fired at the back of the head, each body positioned with calculated care. Soviet archives, long inaccessible, contained grim correspondence between Lavrenti Beria, head of the NKVD, and Joseph Stalin, explicitly approving the executions. A letter dated March 5, 1940, referenced the necessity of eliminating the Polish officer corps to prevent future resistance and ensure ideological compliance. These communications, intercepted in fragments by British intelligence and partially censored in later declassified files, illustrate a cold, bureaucratic calculation that prioritized political expediency over human life. Survivor testimonies from nearby villages, recorded decades later in Polish post-war archives, describe the foreboding presence of NKVD officers and the methodical nature of the mass burials. Villagers recalled the long convoys arriving at night, the prisoners' silent resignation, and the eerie calm maintained by armed guards. Weather reports from that spring indicate unusually heavy snowfall in the Smolensk region, which paradoxically preserved the corpses longer than expected, allowing the German forces to uncover them with remarkable clarity in 1943. Photographs, often blurred and partially destroyed, capture the grim rows of bodies, clothing still intact, eyes wide open in post-mortem terror, creating a haunting visual record of state-sanctioned mass murder. Within the classified OSS reports, now partially declassified, analysts noted that the precision of the executions suggested extensive prior planning. Execution squads were trained in rapid firing techniques, with revolvers, shotguns, and occasionally submachine guns selected for their efficiency in close quarters. Each site was prepared to accommodate thousands, with trenches and pre-dug pits ready before the prisoners arrived. Psychological assessments of the NKVD executioners, recovered in internal Soviet memos, indicate a disturbing emphasis on obedience and emotional detachment. underscoring the regime's deliberate dehumanization of both victims and perpetrators. The international response was carefully muted. Allied governments, aware of German propaganda, hesitated to investigate or publicize findings, fearing that confirmation would fracture wartime alliances with the Soviet Union. In London, a classified MI6 brief dated May 1943 acknowledged the discoveries, yet stressed the necessity of strategic silence. American cables similarly expressed concern that revealing Soviet culpability could compromise collaboration in North Africa and the eventual D-Day planning. These geopolitical calculations rendered the massacre a hidden wound in public historical consciousness for decades, allowing misinformation and Soviet denials to dominate discourse well into the Cold War. Further analysis of the Katyn files reveals meticulous record-keeping regarding each prisoner. Names, ranks, personal histories, and assigned execution dates. Officers with combat experience or intellectual prominence were prioritized, reflecting a targeted strategy to eradicate leadership potential. Forensic reports commissioned in the 1990s corroborated the timeline established by captured German documents, confirming the methodical execution process and providing incontrovertible evidence of Soviet responsibility. The exhumation reports detailed bullet trajectories, decomposition patterns, and the presence of identification documents carefully removed and preserved by NKVD personnel, underscoring the bureaucratic efficiency of the killings. Eyewitnesses later described the atmosphere surrounding the graves. Silence punctuated only by the wind through the birch trees, snow-matted ground underfoot, and the lingering sense of unspoken horror. The forest itself became a metaphorical participant in the tragedy, its isolation facilitating secrecy and its terrain aiding concealment. Subsequent Soviet investigations during the Khrushchev thaw found evidence of deliberate cover-up, including falsified transport records, misleading archival entries, and manipulated photographs, all intended to cast blame on the German occupiers. Declassified intelligence reports reveal that while some officers knew the truth, fear and political expediency prevented public acknowledgement for decades. The Katyn massacre exemplifies the intersection of ideology, state power, and human vulnerability. The decisions made in the Kremlin in early 1940 resonate as a study in calculated violence, illustrating how governments can weaponize bureaucracy to commit atrocities at scale. Even the smallest details, from the type of revolvers issued to execution squads to the pre-dug mass graves hidden beneath snow and foliage, reflect a chilling commitment to efficiency in the service of political objectives. The forests of Smolensk, now silent save for the rustling of leaves, continue to hold the echoes of those final moments, a testimony to lives extinguished in the name of ideological control, a reminder that some histories, though long buried, refuse to remain hidden indefinitely. Decades later, the Katyn files became pivotal in understanding broader Soviet wartime policies, highlighting a systematic approach to political repression beyond occupied Poland. Cross-references in Soviet-era secret police records, combined with declassified Western intelligence, reveal similar operations in the Baltics and Ukraine, where targeted purges and executions mirrored the precision and methodology observed in Katyn. This convergence of evidence underscores that the massacre was not an aberration, but part of a deliberate strategy, integrating military objectives with ideological purification. These insights, painstakingly reconstructed from surviving documents, oral histories, and forensic investigation, provide a stark window into the mechanisms of state terror, illustrating the lethal intersection of command, obedience, and ideology during one of history's darkest periods. The files also include chilling personal notes by NKVD officers, describing both logistical challenges and their own detachment from the human consequences of their actions. A notation dated March 21, 1940 read simply, "Trains departed as scheduled. Execution squads operating at maximum efficiency. No anomalies reported." Such detached language, preserved in bureaucratic handwriting, crystallizes the dual horror of Katyn, the simultaneous orchestration of death and the normalization of its process by those entrusted with its execution. Through a modern lens, the Katyn archives reveal not just a massacre, but the terrifying competence of a regime willing to administer death as a calculated policy instrument, erasing both individuals and the collective memory of a nation. Even today, scholars revisiting these files are struck by the interplay of secrecy, deception, and revelation. The rediscovered Gestapo documents, Soviet correspondence, OSS intercepts, and survivor testimonies converge to paint a portrait of meticulous cruelty, executed with chilling efficiency and preserved in a network of archives that resisted exposure for decades. The forests that witnessed the massacre have become somber memorials. Yet the true magnitude of Katyn extends beyond physical space, into the documented bureaucracy of elimination, the silent complicity of international powers, and the enduring question of how such atrocities can remain hidden in plain sight for so long. Shadows linger in the files, in the snow, and in the unspoken narratives of history. A stark reminder that even the most meticulously buried truths eventually demand recognition, challenging our understanding of morality, memory, and the very mechanisms of war. Chapter 2: Operation Iron Wolf Deception Files. In the winter months of 1942, deep within the corridors of Abwehr headquarters in Berlin, plans were finalized for one of the most audacious deception campaigns of the Second World War, Operation Iron Wolf. The operation was designed to mislead Soviet command into overestimating German troop deployments along the Eastern Front, specifically targeting the Don River defensive sectors. Classified documents reveal that the operation involved the creation of entire phantom divisions, complete with counterfeit orders, fabricated supply chains, and simulated radio transmissions. These measures were meticulously engineered to create the illusion of a formidable German presence capable of launching simultaneous offensives across multiple fronts. Field reports, intercepted by British codebreakers at Bletchley Park, indicated that the Soviets initially responded with caution, but internal skepticism and a lack of corroborating reconnaissance allowed the ruse to take hold, drawing Red Army divisions into ambush zones precisely calculated to inflict maximum casualties. The Abwehr files detail the systematic orchestration of visual and logistical illusions. Dummy tanks, trucks, and artillery pieces were deployed along roads and rail lines, painted with authentic unit insignias and arranged in patterns consistent with real division movements. Camouflage decoys, constructed from wood, canvas, and metal, were positioned in clearings and on high ground, creating convincing silhouettes from aerial reconnaissance. Intercepted radio transmissions, carefully scripted and encoded, broadcast the movement of Panzergruppe Nord and fictitious mechanized infantry units. German officers documented every detail, noting the weather conditions, ground visibility, and even the likely Soviet vantage points, demonstrating the precision with which psychological warfare was executed. These operations required coordination across multiple German military departments, including signals intelligence, logistics, and frontline commanders, ensuring that every fabricated element could withstand scrutiny from both aerial and human reconnaissance. The psychological impact on the Soviet forces was profound. Red Army dispatches, later recovered from Moscow archives, show that officers became increasingly cautious, diverting entire corps to areas where no German troops existed. The Soviets unknowingly fell into carefully prepared kill zones, where the few real German units, supported by artillery and engineering squads, could inflict disproportionate damage. Memoirs from Soviet commanders, partially declassified in the 1990s, describe frustration and confusion as orders conflicted with perceived enemy strength, illustrating the effectiveness of the deception. While the operation caused significant casualties and strategic delays for the Red Army, it remained largely invisible to the general public, its success known only within intelligence circles and war archives, where the details were closely guarded under classified headings. British and American intelligence were aware of the broader outlines of the deception, but were constrained from revealing it. Declassified MI6 files note that revealing German vulnerabilities during Iron Wolf would have compromised Allied code-breaking achievements and strategic advantage. American OSS reports similarly acknowledge the operation's psychological precision, emphasizing the Soviets' reliance on deception assessments in real time. The coordination of Allied intelligence with German misinformation underscores the complexity of wartime information warfare, where truth was manipulated to achieve military objectives, and lives were casualties in the broader strategy of perception management. The meticulous records in the Abwehr archives provide insight into the human element behind the operation. Officers responsible for implementing the deception were trained in counterintelligence and psychological operations, required to maintain strict secrecy even from fellow units. Field agents documented local geography, Soviet patrol patterns, and reconnaissance schedules, ensuring that every dummy installation and false transmission appeared authentic. Logistics teams coordinated the movement of decoys and supplies, often under adverse winter conditions, including heavy snowfall and sub-zero temperatures. Memoirs of German signal officers reveal long nights transmitting scripted radio chatter, maintaining authenticity through repetitive phrases and call sign rotations, a process that demanded both technical skill and disciplined monotony. Operation Iron Wolf also demonstrates the interplay between perception and reality in warfare. The artificial buildup of divisions was not merely a trick of optics. It exploited human psychology, decision-making under uncertainty, and organizational trust. Soviet commanders, believing the fabricated intelligence, committed resources, adjusted defensive positions, and launched counter-moves that ultimately exposed them to German ambushes. Detailed post-war analyses, preserved in both German and British archives, emphasize the careful calibration of the deception, noting that success depended on overconfidence, miscommunication, and the carefully timed release of false signals. Even minor discrepancies, such as incorrectly timed troop movements or inconsistent supply records, could have exposed the operation, highlighting the fragile balance between realism and artifice in wartime deception. The operation's impact extended beyond immediate military outcomes. Iron Wolf influenced subsequent intelligence doctrines and set a precedent for psychological operations during the Cold War. Soviet studies, derived from post-war interrogation reports and captured German documents, underscored the dangers of over-reliance on signal intelligence without corroboration. In this way, the operation was not just a tactical success, but a strategic lesson in the power of illusion and manipulation. German planners documented the operation extensively, with internal reports detailing every decoy's placement, each transmission schedule, and the expected Soviet reaction. These files, later captured by Allied forces and partially declassified, reveal an astonishing level of foresight and coordination, showing that Iron Wolf was as much a triumph of bureaucratic precision as of battlefield cunning. Eyewitness accounts from the regions along the Don River corroborate the archival evidence. Civilians describe sudden surges in vehicle traffic, tents and field installations appearing overnight, and the presence of uniformed personnel who seemed out of place, all carefully choreographed to convince observers of a massive German deployment. These accounts, collected decades later by historians and cross-referenced with operational documents, provide a human dimension to the otherwise technical execution of the campaign, illustrating how deception extended into lived experiences and affected civilian perceptions of the war. Weather records from January through March 1942 document severe snowstorms, yet the planners accounted for these conditions, positioning dummy equipment in areas where snow would enhance authenticity, creating shadows and silhouettes mimicking movement and activity, reinforcing the illusion of scale. Despite its success, Operation Iron Wolf remained largely unrecognized in post-war narratives, obscured by the broader scope of the Eastern Front battles. Only through the painstaking study of Abwehr files, intercepted communications, and corroborating Soviet dispatches has the true magnitude of the deception come to light. The operation exemplifies the deadly sophistication of intelligence warfare, blending technology, psychology, and meticulous planning to manipulate enemy decision-making on a grand scale. Iron Wolf was not merely a tactical maneuver, it was a calculated orchestration of perception, a war within the war fought in silence, shadows, and meticulously recorded deception. Even today, scholars examining the declassified files note the precision with which the operation was executed. Every detail, from the placement of wooden decoys to the timing of falsified radio transmissions, demonstrates an understanding of both enemy psychology and environmental factors. Reports on Soviet response patterns indicate that commanders were systematically misled, resulting in misallocation of troops, exposure to artillery fire, and operational delays. These records emphasize the operational discipline required to sustain a large-scale deception over months, highlighting that Iron Wolf's success was a testament not only to ingenuity, but to the relentless, cold efficiency of bureaucratic planning and execution under extreme wartime conditions. The lasting significance of Operation Iron Wolf lies in its demonstration of how perception can shape reality in conflict. The German planners understood that the mind of the adversary was as critical a battlefield as the terrain itself. Through the careful manipulation of information, physical presence, and psychological pressure, The operation achieved outcomes far exceeding the deployment of actual troops. The archives preserve the echoes of these calculated maneuvers, the careful notation of decoy movements, the repeated rehearsal of radio scripts, and the anticipation of enemy response patterns. Together, they offer an unparalleled glimpse into a war conducted not only with weapons, but with calculated illusion, leaving behind files that expose the profound, hidden complexities of intelligence operations during one of history's most devastating conflicts. Chapter 3: The Black Notebook of Unit 731. In the devastated landscapes of Manchuria, 1945, as Soviet forces advanced and Japanese imperial control crumbled, a charred briefcase emerged from the ashes of abandoned laboratories and military compounds. Inside lay a ledger darkened by fire and age, marked with the ominous title, The Black Notebook. This document catalogued the systematic human experimentation conducted by Unit 731, the infamous Japanese research unit led by Lieutenant General Shiro Ishii. The ledger was more than a record of medical trials. It was a meticulous archive of calculated cruelty, detailing frostbite experiments, vivisections without anesthesia, controlled exposure to plague and cholera, and the psychological manipulation of prisoners, all conducted under the guise of scientific inquiry. Each entry, recorded in precise handwriting and accompanied by diagrams, reflected a bureaucratic approach to terror, one in which the lives of men, women, and children were reduced to experimental variables in a clandestine war of biology and ideology. The notebook's pages reveal the staggering scope of the unit's operations. Entire villages in the surrounding regions were subjected to covert bacteriological attacks, while prisoners were selected based on ethnicity, health status, and perceived resistance potential. The ledger identifies Test Group Maruta 143, human subjects chosen for extreme temperature experiments, with outcomes recorded in methodical, detached language, degrees of frostbite, organ damage, and survival time catalogued as data points. Correspondence between Ishii and senior officers of the Kwantung Army, partially preserved in US and Soviet intelligence files, confirmed that these experiments were sanctioned at the highest levels, with explicit instructions to preserve findings for military applications. The records emphasize efficiency and precision, demonstrating that the operation was not merely ad hoc experimentation, but a strategic investment in biological warfare capability. American intelligence, upon securing fragments of the Black Notebook, faced a troubling moral calculus. Reports in OSS archives detail negotiations granting immunity to Ishii and several of his senior scientists in exchange for experimental data, particularly on frostbite resistance and plague propagation. These documents illustrate a disturbing intersection of war crimes and strategic advantage as US agencies prioritize technological gain over justice. The ledger itself, however, remained incomplete. Pages scorched and blackened, suggesting the deliberate destruction of evidence. Soviet tribunals, examining captured Japanese personnel, noted missing files and inconsistencies, hinting at parallel smuggling operations designed to hide the most sensitive and incriminating experiments. These missing pages remain an enduring enigma, suggesting experiments whose scope and human cost may never be fully known. Detailed analysis of surviving entries underscores the cold, clinical detachment of Unit 731's operations. Frostbite experiments, for example, meticulously documented environmental conditions, subject positioning, and recovery protocols, often juxtaposed with graphic descriptions of tissue necrosis and gangrene. Vivisections, performed without anesthetic, were recorded with anatomical precision, noting each incision and the immediate physiological reactions of subjects. Even minor details, such as the arrangement of instruments, the use of surgical tables, and the lighting in the experimental rooms, were carefully annotated. The ledger reflects a regime of control and methodical observation that elevated cruelty to a scientific process, emphasizing that the terror inflicted was not incidental but integral to the unit's purpose. Eyewitness accounts from former lab technicians and local villagers, collected in post-war Soviet and American reports, corroborate the ledger's contents. Survivors described the removal of prisoners from transport trains, their intake into Compound 731's fenced perimeter, and the systematic assignment to experimental groups. Observers noted the eerie quiet of the compounds, broken only by mechanical sounds, human screams, or the periodic roar of steam sterilizers. Villagers recounted the spread of disease and unexplained deaths, underscoring the broader societal impact of the experiments. These testimonies, while fragmentary, align with the Black Notebook's internal records, creating a chilling synthesis of bureaucratic documentation and lived human horror. The ledger also details the administrative machinery underpinning the experiments. Orders from Ishii were circulated with precision, delineating responsibilities for dissection teams, bacteriological testing units, and supply personnel. Logistical entries accounted for reagent acquisition, experimental scheduling, and data recording procedures. Even mundane operational notes, such as fuel deliveries and the maintenance of water purification systems, were recorded, reflecting an obsessive attention to detail that facilitated the seamless execution of atrocities. Intelligence analysts reviewing these files noted the stark juxtaposition of ordinary administrative diligence against acts of unimaginable cruelty, highlighting a systemic normalization of barbarity within Unit 731. Further insights emerge from Soviet reports, which describe post-war examinations of experimental facilities. Laboratories were found equipped with specialized freezing chambers, chemical containment units, and rudimentary ventilation systems designed to test pathogen transmission. The surviving vials, labeled in Japanese and partially catalogued by Soviet personnel, contained anthrax, plague, and other pathogens. Detailed sketches in the Black Notebook correspond to these installations, demonstrating foresight in experimental design and meticulous adherence to procedural rigor. Notes on subject selection, timing of exposure, and environmental manipulation reveal a disciplined, methodical approach, emphasizing that the human subjects were considered data points rather than people. The Black Notebook's entries extend beyond biological experimentation. Psychological manipulations were carefully recorded, noting prisoner reactions to isolation, sensory deprivation, and simulated combat stress. Observers documented compliance, resistance, and the impact of fear on physiological responses, integrating these findings into broader military strategy. Soviet and American analysts recognized the potential military applications of these insights, yet also noted the profound moral cost. The ledger's content, in its unflinching specificity, captures both the technical mastery and the ethical void at the heart of Unit 731's operations. Even within the Black Notebook's charred margins, traces of human error and improvisation are evident. Notes about equipment malfunction, unexpected fatalities, and procedural deviations provide glimpses into the unpredictable reality of the experiments, demonstrating that despite the scientific rigor, the human consequences remained catastrophic. Surviving internal memos describe debates over experimental methods, with some junior officers questioning the ethics, only to be silenced or reassigned. The ledger thus becomes a window into both the administrative structure and the internal moral tension, a record of a system engineered for efficiency at the cost of humanity. In the post-war period, the legacy of the Black Notebook influenced international approaches to biological warfare research, ethical oversight, and war crime prosecution. Portions of the data were integrated into American and Soviet programs, while extensive censorship obscured public awareness of Unit 731's scope. Investigators who later accessed the files were struck by the meticulousness with which the experiments were planned and recorded. The bureaucratic precision masking profound human suffering. The ledger, fragmented but enduring, remains a stark reminder that war can transform scientific inquiry into an instrument of terror, and that documentation, however methodical, cannot erase the ethical and moral dimensions of human suffering. The Black Notebook of Unit 731 stands as a historical testament to cruelty normalized under the banner of military necessity. From the explicit instructions for pathogen exposure to the detailed anatomical sketches of vivisection, every page reflects a chilling intersection of administrative competence and moral collapse. The files, preserved in charred pages, partially declassified intelligence reports, and corroborating witness testimony, reveal the scale, scope, and calculated nature of the atrocities committed. Each entry documents not only the acts themselves, but the cold, bureaucratic lens through which human life was quantified, observed, and ultimately destroyed. The ledger's survival allows the world a glimpse into these horrors, ensuring that the dark science of Unit 731 and the systemic mechanisms that enabled it are neither forgotten nor dismissed as mere wartime aberrations. Chapter 4. Operation Paperclip's Forbidden Cargo Lists. In the months following Germany's surrender in 1945, Allied forces faced the immense task of cataloging, seizing, and repurposing German military and scientific assets. Among these operations, Operation Paperclip stands out as a deliberate and morally complex endeavor, tasked with relocating German scientists, engineers, and medical personnel to the United States. Beyond the celebrated rocketry pioneers and aerodynamic specialists, hidden within the classified cargo manifests were names that implicated direct involvement in some of the most heinous war crimes of the Third Reich. SS doctors who had overseen euthanasia programs, individuals responsible for human experimentation in concentration camps, and researchers who participated in hypothermia and high-altitude trials were quietly transported under false identities, their dossiers sanitized to facilitate employment in American military and research programs. The Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency's files reveal a tension between justice and strategic advantage, as legal authorities' efforts to prosecute were systematically overridden by Army intelligence seeking technological supremacy in the emerging Cold War. The manifest lists are precise, recording not only names and ranks, but also the contents of crates, including vials containing biological samples, annotated research logs, and blueprints for experimental apparatus used in human trials. FBI surveillance reports from 1946 detail internal conflict within American agencies, as agents protested the integration of known war criminals into military research. Correspondence between JOA officials emphasizes expediency, noting that certain dossiers were scrubbed to remove compromising details, while scientific value retained for immediate use. Documents indicate that Dr. Hubertus Strughold, later known as the father of space medicine, benefited from this process. His work on hypothermia and decompression physiology linked directly to experiments conducted on prisoners in Dachau and elsewhere. These records reveal the calculated moral compromises underpinning the United States' acquisition of German expertise. The logistical undertaking of Operation Paperclip was staggering. Scientists, families, and their research materials were transported via rail, air, and ship, often under military escort. Crates containing research notes, experimental apparatus, and biological samples were labeled innocuously or misidentified, sometimes as industrial equipment or personal effects. Field officers documented each shipment meticulously, with chain of custody logs and security clearances ensuring sensitive materials reached secure facilities at Fort Bliss, White Sands, and later Huntsville, Alabama. Photographs and internal memos show crates stacked in warehouses, marked with codes correlating to classified experiments and guarded by armed personnel. The juxtaposition of everyday logistical operations with the profoundly dark contents of these shipments underscores the eerie normalization of moral compromise during post-war strategic planning. Declassified Justice Department files reveal intense debate over the ethical ramifications of granting immunity to these individuals. Prosecutors argued that the crimes committed by certain scientists warranted immediate legal action, citing eyewitness testimony and documentation of human experimentation, particularly in hypothermia, high altitude, and toxicology trials. Army intelligence countered, emphasizing the necessity of acquiring knowledge for national security, especially in anticipation of Soviet competition. Minutes from interagency meetings capture the deliberations, exposing a stark moral calculus. The potential to save future American lives through technological advantage was weighed against the historical accountability of perpetrators. These records provide a sobering view into the choices made in the transition from total war to Cold War pragmatism. The actual research integrated into American programs often had disturbing origins. Data from Dachau hypothermia experiments were repurposed for military survival manuals, while neurological and chemical experimentation influenced early studies in human tolerance to stress and pharmacology. Some of the doctors continued work on biological and chemical weapons under classified programs, raising profound questions about complicity and the transmission of unethical methodologies across national boundaries. Archives also indicate ongoing surveillance and monitoring, as intelligence agencies sought to mitigate risks of retaining former Nazis while still exploiting their expertise. The tension between secrecy, strategic advantage, and justice permeates every file, log, and shipment record associated with Paperclip. Eyewitness testimonies, recorded decades later in congressional investigations, provide insight into the lived reality of these operations. Warehouse workers, military escort personnel, and administrative staff described crates labeled confidential or research materials, occasionally marked with cryptic references to human testing. Officers noted the surreal juxtaposition of high-tech equipment and stacks of vials, documents, and personal effects suggesting human experimentation. Transport manifests often included code numbers instead of names, reflecting deliberate obfuscation to shield identities. Reports indicate that some scientists had undergone interviews to establish loyalty and reliability, while background checks deliberately ignored evidence of wartime atrocities. These operational realities reveal how bureaucratic systems can normalize moral compromise in the pursuit of strategic objectives. The broader strategic rationale for Operation Paperclip was inseparable from early Cold War anxieties. Intelligence analyses recognized the looming threat of Soviet capture of German expertise, prompting urgency in relocating scientists and preserving their work. Internal memos emphasized that failure to secure these individuals and their research could cede technological advantage to enemy forces, a priority that consistently overrode legal and ethical considerations. The clandestine nature of the operation meant that even within American institutions, knowledge of the full scope of Paperclip's cargo was limited, restricted to small groups of military and intelligence officials. The secrecy surrounding these activities ensured minimal public scrutiny, allowing the integration of morally compromised individuals into critical research programs without accountability. Operation Paperclip's legacy is both technological and moral. Its classified cargo lists, declassified only in recent decades, reveal the stark choices made during the transition from war to post-war geopolitics. Expertise gained at the expense of justice, strategic advantage derived from moral compromise. Researchers and policymakers carefully documented each transfer, yet redacted and manipulated records obscured the full extent of human experimentation embedded within the shipments. These files highlight a troubling dimension of post-war history, demonstrating how strategic imperatives can override legal, ethical, and humanitarian considerations, embedding war crimes within the infrastructure of scientific progress. The archives preserve not only the factual record of shipments and names, but the shadow of complicity, a reminder that behind every technological leap lies a web of moral ambiguity and suppressed truth. As historians continue to sift through these materials, the chilling implications of Paperclip remain clear. Each name, crate, and manifest entry represents a calculated decision, the reconciliation of moral responsibility with geopolitical necessity. From whitewashed biographies to sanitized dossiers, the operation exemplifies the lengths to which governments will go to secure advantage, even when it necessitates complicity in atrocities. The forbidden cargo of Operation Paperclip is thus more than a logistical record. It is a testament to the hidden compromises that shape history, a reminder that progress can sometimes be inseparable from the shadows it conceals. Every document, shipment record, and intelligence report is a fragment of a story that continues to challenge our understanding of justice, memory, and the true cost of strategic triumph. The shadows of history linger in ways both subtle and profound, hidden in archives, mass graves, and the faded ink of censored documents. Across forests, laboratories, and secret warehouses, the suppressed truths of World War II and its immediate aftermath reveal a world in which morality was often sacrificed to strategy, ideology, and survival. The files unearthed, whether cataloguing the systematic execution of officers in Katyn, the orchestration of deception campaigns like Operation Iron Wolf, the grotesque experiments of Unit 731, or the morally compromised scientists smuggled into America under Operation Paperclip, expose the mechanisms by which human lives became instruments of power and knowledge. Even decades later, these revelations challenge our understanding of accountability, complicity, and the long shadows cast by decisions made in secrecy. As historians pore over fragmented records, forensic evidence, and witness testimonies, each page uncovers more than factual information. It resurrects the voices of the silenced, illuminates the calculus of cruelty, and confronts us with questions that have no easy answers. How much knowledge is too costly when obtained at the expense of human life? How do societies reconcile progress with the moral compromises that facilitated it? The answers remain elusive, buried within layers of declassified cables, scorched notebooks, and meticulously sanitized manifests. Yet the persistence of these truths insists that history cannot remain fully hidden. In the quiet that follows the reading of these files, the world is left to reckon with a chilling reality: that some of the darkest chapters of human history are not only recorded, but preserved, awaiting acknowledgement, reflection, and the enduring responsibility to remember.